taking 20 meters.
All right, let's go ahead and kick this thing off. Craig's getting impatient. I can see it. So, all right, welcome everybody to the June, believe it or not. We're halfway through 2022. The June YCARS presentation meeting. We're going to get a serenade by Theo, I think. No, just kidding. We have Craig Ramsey, KM5E. He's fairly new to the club, but he is a digital wizard when it comes to digital modes with ham radio. So we're very pleased to have him join us this evening and do the presentation for the club. And without further ado, Craig, it's all yours, buddy.
All right. Hey, y'all. So I'm Craig, KM5E, still getting used to saying that because I've just changed my call sign. You say something like 1,000 times and then you change it, and it's like changing your name. It's tough. Licensed in 2020. I picked up the hobby like a lot of people during COVID. I've been a long time shortwave listener. Spent a lot of time using web SDRs, RTL SDR, et cetera, et cetera. New to the club, but I'm from Rock Hill. I've been in the area forever. So here's kind of what I'm planning on covering tonight. Some of this is going to go pretty quick because don't have too much to say on some of these. But mainly the topic is going to be FT8 heavy, and I'm going to try and touch on some other cool things you can do digital mode on the radio. I guess to get started, FT8 created by a couple of guys in 2017. It's very quickly became one of, if not the most popular digital mode on HF. Although it was originally designed for VHF and sporadic E openings and such. The primary benefit you get from it is it's good at decoding weak signals, but you don't have to use it as a low power mode. The mode, the information is conveyed in a 12.5 second transmission. The intervals alternate back and forth, and that makes it important to have your time set correctly. And then you've probably, if you've tuned around on the lower portion of any of the bands, you've probably heard the Swarm of Angry Bees. That's FT8. The software for FT8 is WSJTX. I'm going to share this slide deck. It has all the links in it. It has all of your digital, or not all, it has many of your digital modes. The most popular ones are FT8 and FT4. It also includes Whisper and some modes that are designed for things like EME, bouncing signals off the moon, and bouncing signals off of the trails left by meteors. And then FT4, very similar to FT8. Main difference here with FT4 is it is significantly faster, but not as sensitive. If you have a really busy contest weekend, like the recent ARRL digital contest, the bandwidth required by the signal is a little bit larger, and so it's a little bit more difficult to kind of pack everybody into the band space. But the QSO rate's higher because the transmission time is halved. I'll go over a kind of an example exchange, and then I'm going to switch over and do a demo, and hopefully we'll be able to make a contact, or we'll be able to observe some other contacts that are going on. So a typical contact starts just like on sideband with someone calling CQ. And And the information that's exchanged is your Maidenhead grid square, the 4-character Maidenhead grid square, along with a reception report. So you start off, someone's calling CQ, usually a lot, and then someone will respond. So if you see someone calling CQ, you'll respond. You'll say, Kilo 5 Mike Echo. This is Kilo 4 Yankee Tango Zulu. I'm in grid square Echo Mike 94. And then I would respond, Kilo 4 Yankee Tango Zulu. This is Kilo Mike 5 Echo. I hear you at -1 reception. So that's 1 decibel below the reference. These are relative, which is quite a strong signal. Then the club would reply, Kilo 5 Mike Echo. This is Kilo 4 Yankee Tango Zulu. I can hear you at -15, which is perfectly decodable, but not a super strong signal. And then at the end, you'll exchange, pleasantries at the end. You'll say Kilo 4 Yankee Tango Zulu. This is Kilo Mike 5 Echo, and then RRR means I'm ending the conversation. This you would use there. You have 2 options here in the software. You could use RRR or you could use RR73. Because at this point you don't know if they've heard your acknowledgement of their reception report. If you say RRR, then you are expecting them to reply with 73. If you say RR73, that means that you are not necessarily expecting a reply and that you're expecting to move on to your next contact. In that case, I usually will respond with 73 anyway, and the software does so automatically, but it's not strictly necessary to complete the contact. And then you can, as far as calling CQ goes, you have some options. So you could do a directed CQ. This is commonly used for POTA or contests, or if you're looking for a particular state, or if you're looking for DX. And that is up to a 4-character string there. There's some additional rules here, but you can put just about anything that's 4 characters or less here. And this, for instance, would let you know or let everybody know that you're at a POTA park or you're participating in the ARL contest, which was CQ test, or let people know that you're looking really only for contacts in Wyoming. You actually see this a lot. In fact, I will switch over to the live. Here's someone right now looking for Wyoming. And then CQDX is another common one you see. And then I'll switch back over and we'll do a demo. Hopefully we'll be able to pull a contact out here. All right. So this is the WSJTX software. And I have the mode set to FT8. And then under the settings menu, you can configure all of your options. You can configure cant control for your radio. You can configure your audio interface settings. And I'll dive a bit more into that later. The most important thing here is that you have your call sign right, Usually you only have to get this right once unless you change, or if you're sometimes using the club call or things of that nature. And then your grid square as well. Setting your grid square is important because people care about grid squares a lot in FT8. And having the right grid there is important to whomever you're contacting. All right. So I'm on 15 meters right now. I'm going to clear that. We're going to start an example, see if anybody's out there. I'm going to call CQ. So this is going to be CQ Kilo Mike 5 Echo. And then I'm in Echo Mike 94. And I have it set to transmit on the even time slot. So it waited to the beginning of the even time slot to transmit. The transmission's 12.5 seconds long, which gives you about a second and a half to click on somebody to respond to. So you have to pay a little bit close attention, but it's definitely a digital mode that can be done while you're doing other things. I'm going to give it a couple of shots to see if anybody responds. And if I see anybody interesting over here on the left, I'll respond to them. While we're waiting on that, I'll give you kind of a description of what's going on here. So this is your band scope. So this is everything that's coming through the passband on your radio. And each of these squares is representative of a signal coming in. So usually you can see about as much activity over here as you see up here. But this tool does a couple of things. It lets you set your transmit frequency and receive frequency so that you make sure you're in a clear slot. And then it also gives you kind of an instant view of how much activity there is on the band. All right. And while I was talking about that, Whiskey 1 Juliet Bravo Delta responded to me. He's in Echo Lima 87. Normally I would go look up where that is. All right. And so we could see this went just like the example. I called CQ. They responded with their grid square. I sent them their signal reports. They sent me mine. We could hear each other quite well. I can hear him at +1 and he can hear me at -2. And then, we exchanged salutations at the end. So moving on to the main menu for WSJTX, you've got two panes. The first is everything that's going on in the band. So you can see all of the conversations. It looks like XE2NK and CT1AOZ just completed a QSO. So you can see everybody talking to each other over here. And then this pane here is your receive frequency. So the receive frequency is marked up here in the band scope with the green box. You can also set it here. And this number is the offset from the dial frequency. And as you can see, you can fit many, many FT8 signals in the passband. Here's another thing to look out for. You can see this guy here is splattering all over the band. And you see this frequently when people are transmitting up near the top and bottom of the passband.
I have a question, Craig, if I may.
Go for it, Vicky.
I don't know if it's my screen, but I can't see the top of the waterfall. Is there any way you can roll it down?
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Is that better?
almost. Okay, that's much, much. I can see it great now. Because I was curious where you selected your transmit frequency when you first got on there.
Okay. And then as a example of that, you can a left click sets the receive frequency, and if you control and left click, that selects both. So that moves your transmit frequency. Generally, if everybody tries to stay even on the 50 hertz increments here, which are y'all may or may not be able to see them, but there's little tick marks for the 50 hertz increments. If everybody tries to stay lined up with those, that allows the most signals to fit into the space. All right, and then I guess going back to the main window, this is the section where your controls are. So we have enable and disable transmit. And then we also have the halt transmit button. This stops transmission immediately. So if you're in the middle of transmitting a message and you hit the enable TX button to take it back to gray, that's not going to stop the transmission. It only stops subsequent transmissions. So if you see that you've selected the wrong message or you're transmitting to the wrong call sign because you clicked on the wrong call sign over here, you can use the Halt TX button to stop transmission. All right, and then I'll enable transmit. We'll see if we can get this guy down in Ecuador. Over here on the left are your radio controls. So if you have cat control set up, you can use this box to select which band you're on. If you are using Vox to control your radio, so if you're manually setting the frequency and then using Vox to enable transmit, you still want to make sure that this matches the band that you're on, because this information is used in reporting back to PSK Reporter, which is another feature of this software. It reports all of the stations you receive. Optionally, it reports all stations you receive to PSK Reporter. All right, looks like you heard me at minus 14, which is not bad for 20 watts. And then I'll go over briefly the colors. Over here, it's pretty easy. Yellow is your transmit signals. Red are any signals that you've received. And then the other colors are just any signals that happen to fall into your RX frequency. And then when you've completed a contact, you get this nice log view. And you can see where that was an example of I double clicked on that and it chose the wrong message to reply with. So I halted transmission and then restarted it. He's probably not going to decode anything from that. So that's something to watch out for. Sometimes you think you've completed a QSO and you haven't. And sometimes, especially when people transmit things out of order, the software gets confused as to what state it should be in. So I'm just going to send him 73 again and make sure that that shows up in his log. Oh, actually, I was mistaken. This is a different station calling me. We'll respond to him to be polite. This is the screen you use to log your contact. Call sign. This is all the standard fields. You can leave a comment, any other information you have. They give you a pretty exotic list of propagation modes to choose from if you think you know what propagation mode that you have with the guy that you're contacting. And then when you hit OK, that saves it in the WSJTX log. If you have your logging software configured to work with the software, it will also save it in your log. I just manually manage my log from FT8. I don't have the integration with my main log book set up because I use FT8 on a separate machine than my main log's on, and I haven't delved into the network settings for that. All right, so I'm going to pause here. If there's any questions about what any of the interface of WSJTX, what any of these buttons do, I'm happy to answer them while I have everything up. All right. Either I'm really good at describing things or everybody's mic shy. That's okay.
This is Skip. I've just been playing with this the last couple of days, and I keep transmitting out, and I can see my radio, the transmit light comes on, and I keep doing the CQ, but for some reason I'm not getting any contacts. Nobody responds to me. I don't know if I got BO or what. But,
most likely, they haven't invented smell-o-vision yet, so most likely what's going on is you have the wrong input selected on your radio. So the cant control is moving it to transmit and is probably listening to your microphone instead of the line input. If you ask me again afterwards, we'll see if we can I can pull up the manual for the radio and we'll see if we can figure out how to set that.
Okay. All right. I'll be standing by and I'll just wait till afterwards. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to switch back to my slides and we'll move on.
One quick question. It's John. Philip just sent me a text and asked about setting up macros.
Okay. So by default, you get the standard exchange. You have in the settings, you can add additional macros, and then these show up in this box here, the TX5 slot, which is, kind of your ending message. So if you want to say, thanks 7-3, good luck, you can switch to that. And if you add any additional macros, they'll show up in here. It's not a macro in the traditional automation sense. It's more of a free text message that you have a bunch of them you can choose from. And then I believe there's a way to add them in such a way that they include the call sign. but I have not messed with that. Another thing that gets confused with is the special operating activity modes. If there's a de-expedition, there's a fox and hound mode. The fox is if you're the person who's calling CQ, hound or anybody who's trying to get a hold of the fox. That when you put it in hound mode, it changes your standard messages. Same thing for the field day mode. Field days this weekend. The RIDI roundup, which is now the ARRL digital mode contest or whatever they're calling it. And then there's some other contests as well that are programmed in here. And then there's a few contests where they have a patched version of WSJTX that you use. All right. And I'm going to switch over to my prepackaged FT8 tips. So FT8, really good at decoding signals, even if they're quite weak, even down to 20 decibels below the reference. You see decodes that are below that. If you have a really low noise floor, you can sometimes decode better than that. I don't usually reply because I'm usually using lower power. If I can only hear them at minus 21, the exception to that is like if it's a Parks on the Air station and they may only be using 5 or 10 watts, and I have more than that because I'm at home. Another important thing is your transmit frequency. So if you see somebody and you really want to work them, especially if they're quite distant from you, and you think that you think they should be able to hear you, either because you're using more power or because you've had contacts with the same part of the world recently, chances are that you have a collision with someone on their who's using the same transmit frequency as you. And so what I'd usually do is, and I'm going to switch back to WSJTX here. What I usually do is choose a different transmit frequency. So if I was trying to call somebody and they couldn't hear me here at 600, I'll go, down to 300. And you can either set that up here, or if you want to dial it in really precisely, down below within WSJTX itself, you have the option of setting the frequency. Another tip along the same line, don't match the frequency that the other station is transmitting on. So, if you're doing Morse code or sideband, you want to be right on top of them so that you're not using as much bandwidth, and so you can both hear each other. In this case, you don't want to do that with FT8 because it always decodes everybody in the entire passband. If more than one person is trying to call, it can decode two people that have the same transmit frequency as long as they're not like perfectly right on top of each other. But it's much more likely that the two of you just jam each other. So always, when you pick a transmit frequency, listen, pick a clear slot and stick to it until it quits working for you. And then you may want to listen, and then find another clear slot. I have Kind of already mentioned Fox and Hound mode. Fun fact, the word de-expedition is in the Google dictionary. Someone at Google must be a ham radio operator. Another thing to know, especially if you're getting started with FT8, is if you have your radio turned all the way up or you've got an amplifier and you're using sideband, when you switch to digital modes, the workload on your antenna is much higher because the duty cycle is higher. It's like transmitting FT8 is like holding down your CW key for 12 and a half seconds and doing that over and over and over again. So depending on your antenna, most manufacturers give you a rating for digital that is about a quarter to a third the power that it's rated for on sideband. I know in particular with the Wolf River Coils antennas, they get pretty warm even at 20 watts FT8. And I've seen pictures of those antennas melting under an FT8 workload. Another thing to note, the DX Code of Conduct, it applies to FT8 just as much as anything else. Be a good steward of the frequencies. Don't continuously transmit. If you're calling CQ, that's one thing. But if you're trying to pick up that new country, if you're trying to pick up that de-expedition, and you transmit 5 or 6 times and they don't hear you, maybe try a slightly different transmit frequency, but don't continuously transmit, because odds are that they just can't hear you for whatever reason, and you're going to be blocking up bandwidth that someone else may need to make their QSO. There is a feature in the software. If you just turn on TX and walk away, it will only transmit so many times, and then it will turn off automatically. If you're getting caught by that a lot, you may want to pay closer attention to what you're doing here. FT8 is a great mode for talking to someone, having a beer. Keep one eye on the screen, because you definitely doesn't have to have your full attention. But if you let it get away from you, you can wind up jamming people and making it a less pleasant experience. Plus, you're putting extra wear and tear on your antenna and such. Another thing is, if someone's in the middle of a QSO and you see, hey, I recognize that call sign, I want to have a contact with them. This comes up a lot in Parks on the Air or with the expeditions. Wait for them to either say 73 or to call CQ. They'll like it if it's someone who's contesting or is trying to have a really high QSO rate. They'll appreciate you calling when they say 73, because it means they don't have to waste a transmit cycle calling CQ. But if you transmit, for example, while they are exchanging their signal reports, you could inadvertently jam the person that they're trying to have the contact with and make the contact take longer to complete. Or especially if you've ever been out doing Parks on the Air, this right-hand pane can get very full of red call signs, and keeping everything straight can be a challenge. And then, speaking of Parks on the Air, each band and each mode for Parks on the Air count as a new contact. So if I am out at a park and Vicky responds to my CQ on FT8, and then I switch to FT4, she can contact me again, counts as a new contact for Parks on the Air. If I then switch to another band and she can still hear me, we can have a contact again on FT8 and then FT4, and that'll be 4 contacts, 2 bands, 2 modes, twice over. And then lastly, the receive frequency, which is denoted by this green marker here. It's also denoted down here, is WSJTX when it's decoding the data. The first thing it does is decode what's in that RX frequency. This is mainly helpful when you are in the middle of a contact. When someone responds to you, it moves the RX frequency to their transmit frequency. So it makes sure that whoever you're trying to talk to gets decoded first, because it can actually take longer than the kind of 2.5 seconds you get to click on who to respond to decode everybody, especially when the band's really busy. And then a final tip that I forgot to write down is there's this little box here, the CQ only. It cleans up this band activity pane by only showing you people who are calling CQ. All right. And then there were a couple more tips that I forgot to write down. If you look over here on the left, there's a whole bunch of colors. I've set some of them are custom, but these that are marked in green are people who have registered with Logbook of the World. I can tell you that if you're responding to, especially to DX, people will preferentially contact those who are in Logbook of the World. I know that as soon as I got registered with Logbook of the World, I had a much better time calling CQ than I did without it. So if you're, we asked earlier who is a member of the ARRL. You don't have to be a member, but definitely get registered with Logbook of the World. It can be worth the effort. Even if you're not using it to chase awards, it helps other people chase awards. There's a lot of people who like to collect grid squares, and especially if you're in a more rural area of South Carolina, there are not a lot of people out there. And if you're in a rare grid square, you can get a lot of people responding to you just because of the grid square. And then a final note on the colors, you can set in settings, you can set what each color means, and you can uncheck them if it's not important to you. For instance, I have CQ zones and ITU zones unchecked because they're not important to me. All right, and then I'm going to switch it back over. This is lifted straight out of the WSJTX documentation. Basically, before you transmit, make sure you have everything set up right. You want to have your call sign grid locator set, cat control set up. Make sure your computer's clock is close to the UTC time within a second. If you're in the field, you could try and set it by listening to WWV, or you can get a GPS chip, or if you have network connectivity, there's software called Dimension 4, and there's several options for this. The audio input and output devices, pretty much any sound card will support this setting. Got to have your radio set to the appropriate sideband. If you got it set to, especially, when you go down on 40 or 80, if you have it set on lower sideband, no one will be able to understand you. Digital modes tend to always be upper sideband, no matter what band they're on. And then the wider your passband, the more signals you can hear. All right, and then I'll touch briefly on rig control. I don't have every radio that ever existed, so I'm not going to be able to dive into specifically what to do, but in general, you have two options for control. You can either set up the cant control, which is where your computer controls the radio. If you happen to have a radio with a built-in sound card, use a shielded USB cable. I cannot emphasize this enough. I used a cheap USB cable that I already had, and I had all kinds of problems. There's a specific USB cable. It's cheap. It's blue, and you can see the foil through the insulation, and it's worked great for me. Cant control is great because it makes it easy to change bands. You just click the box at WSJTX, and it changes the transmit frequency. One of the very nice things you get with cant control that isn't available to you if you don't have it is the transmit frequency of your radio. So WSJTX will position your transmit signal if you have cant control, it positions it dead in the middle of your passband, and it adjusts the dial frequency of your radio to do that. That gives you a much cleaner output signal. If you are using a radio manually without cant control and that's not available to you, try to stick to the middle of the band so that you get less distortion. Earlier, I pointed out someone whose signal was splattered all over and they were up at the top of the band. That's why. So they were transmitting at the top of their radio's passband, and the signal was getting distorted, and they were using a lot of power. You don't have to buy an expensive sound card either. I don't recommend using the sound card that's built onto your motherboard of your computer. You can, but it can become a pathway for RF to get into the heart of your computer, and it can be a pathway for RF to get out of your computer into your radio, and that can cause interference. I use it's the cheapest external sound card, and it works great. I have a link to it in the slide, and I'll have a link to the slide deck. I'll post it in the meeting. These are the settings I use on my Xiegu G90, which is a popular radio because it's cheap. That's why I have one. So I don't use cant control. I make sure that Vox is enabled. I disable auto gain control because as the auto gain control goes up and down, it can distort the signal and make it harder for WSJTX to decode it. I set the input to line. If you don't do that, then it's picking up your microphone. And then I use a cable that I bought off a guy on eBay who makes it specifically for the radio. And then on the input side, I have the filters just as wide open as you can get them. I have an Elecraft KX2, and I use similar settings on it. I'm going to touch briefly on some other software that's available. GS8, it's derived from WSJTX. The mode is derived from FT8. It has all of the nice things about FT8. That you can decode low signals. You don't have to have much power to make the QSO. But it's been modified for freeform text. It has a heartbeat feature, so your station can transmit, "Hey, I'm here," every 10 minutes. And then it has some features that allow for asynchronous communication. So you don't have to be at your radio to receive a message on GS8. You can have it broadcast a heartbeat. And then when someone wants to send you a message, they can listen for your heartbeat and then start transmitting. And then the message appears in a message, like an inbox. It's very neat. This GS8 is really nice if you want to schedule something with somebody. Getting an interactive QSO just randomly over the air can be tough. It's not as popular as I think it should be. And I'd like to propose along those same lines that we should have a GS8 call night sometime. Another interesting piece of software is Grid Tracker. So Grid Tracker shows you all of the grids you've worked. It also shows you on the map where all of the messages that you're decoding are coming from. So every time someone exchanges a grid square, that can show up on this map, and it puts markers between them, and that helps you see where the band openings are. Grid Tracker is a great tool. I would definitely advise you to take a look at it and to read through the documentation for it. The documentation for Grid Tracker is great. If you can kind of mess with the network settings to get it set up, then setting up any of the other kind of add-on software for WSJTX is really easy. Another one that I like is JT Alert. I'm sure you saw that left-hand pane can get quite busy. JT Alert shows you, it has, among many other features, has a box that shows you where everybody is and lets you respond. And then I will start JT Alert here. And most of the time this works on the first try. If not, but you can, the really nifty thing about JT Alert is you can configure it to do exactly what it says and send you an alert when it detects something. So for instance, I have it set to send me an audible alert. It dings when it hears someone say CQ POTA, or you can set it to highlight somebody if they're in a particular state that you're looking for. I know I had this set up for Wyoming and Alaska. Those are the last two states I needed for my digital worked all states. But it gives you some good information. It pulls out from the database, where they're at, what country they are, what state they're in, and some additional information. Looks like there's a band opening right now on 15 meters to Japan, if anyone's got FT8 open. I've yet to get Japan. All right, and then There's another nifty piece of software called PSK Reporter. This isn't everybody who heard me. This is everybody who heard people from our grid square. So you can search by grid square or call sign. The tool's designed to let you see where the band openings are, but it also is really good at telling where your signal's getting out. And that's at pskreporter.info. It's a fantastic website. And then just in brief, I have barely scratched the surface of the sound card modes that are available. There's another great piece of software called FL Digi. And it supports things like RTTY, Olivia, Hellschreiber, PSK31. Another thing to note, the ARRL sends out their field day bulletin, which is worth points at your club activation over digital modes. They have 3 modes selected. FL Digi can decode all of them, and those are the frequencies for them. And then there's WindLink, and there's the VARA modem for WindLink. That is very popular. I don't have set up to play audio, but you've heard WindLink. If you're kind of between where you hear FT8 and where you start hearing sideband signals, particularly on 40 meters, you hear a lot of VARA modem going on. And then there's Pactor, which is a proprietary mode usually used for email. All right. So in conclusion, lots of digital modes out there. There's an entire universe of them. They're really great for DX. They're really great if you live somewhere that has a high noise floor. You won't be able to decode all the faintest signals, but you can still make contacts. I've made contacts over FT8 at a Parks on the Air park where the noise floor was 10/9. Also, the National Over Mountain Victory Trail has some spots on it that are really, really loud electrically. And I probably should have just chosen a better spot, but that's how POTA goes sometimes. All right, and I'm going to open the floor for any questions.
Well, Craig, it's John. Thank you very much. This has been absolutely wonderful. Great information. I'm not into digital modes, but you may have given me a little bit of fire to try something out. So does anybody have any questions?
I do, of course.
Go right ahead, Miss Vicki.
Go back on your, I call it WYSIGX, WSJTX, and as though you're calling CQ. And on the right-hand screen, I'll wait for you to pull it up.
All right,
You call CQ, and bam, you get 3 nice, bright, shiny red lines. All these folks replying to you.
Okay,
how does the I get that I probably shouldn't even ask. How does it know which one to reply to? But how would you reply to them?
Okay.
Go ahead.
So you've asked a couple of questions there. So for the first one, I have auto sequence on, which automatically does the messages in this sequence. And there's another option called call first. It pulls down the first call that gets decoded. I know earlier I said not to call someone on the exact same frequency that they're calling on. It's a bad practice, but sometimes that can help you be the first person who gets decoded. And then kind of the second question, I usually get a response immediately when I call CQ because I've done Parks on the Air. A lot of people use JT Alert, and use the wanted call signs feature, which will show up here. And then you can add them. You can add their call sign to your list. And then anytime they transmit, you get an audible alert out of JT Alert from there that you've decoded them. Excuse me. I'm in a lot of people's list because I've done a lot of parks on the air with FT8. And I'm listed on Logbook of the World. Those two things can definitely help you get a better response rate to your CQ messages. That's, of course, in addition to, more power will get you heard better, as will a better antenna. Oh, did that answer your question?
Well, I'm saying that you've called CQ, and on the right-hand screen, simultaneously, you receive 3 separate call signs responding to your CQ. The system is going to select the first one, and it will automatically complete it through the 73. Do you go back up and select the second one, or do you wait for them to call you back again? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
How do you handle the pileup?
Oh, so how I handle the pileup, I generally, if it's a lot of people, I'll just call CQ and let it answer whoever calls next. If the pileup's not too crazy, I'll try and pick people out. So as you are receiving, so if you've just finished a transmit cycle and you're receiving, you can go ahead and select somebody in the list, and it will go ahead and start the auto sequence again with their call sign instead. So as I'm expecting them, so if I've said RR73 and then I'm expecting them to reply with the 73, I'll go on and click on another red call sign in the list. That can be quite fiddly. This isn't really the best interface. Sometimes JT Alert, anybody who calls you is going to show up in this box in JT Alert. This box will get pretty full, and it notates when you've had when you've completed the contact with them if they're in your log. So you can also use this feature here in JT Alert to try and manage that. The way DXpeditions do it is they use Fox and Hound mode, and then they use an outside script to kind of automate things. A note on automation, any automation that's kind of outside of the application. So there's WSJT Zulu software that has some additional features built into it, like it'll automatically call CQ and then respond to somebody and then start calling CQ again after the QSO is complete. That's out there. The contacts that are made that way, where it's fully automated, the ARRL prohibits them from being uploaded to Logbook of the World. A lot of the parks in the air, people don't really like the fully automatic call sign or the fully automatic QSOs, because if you can walk away from your radio and make 10, 15 QSOs, that doesn't sound like fun to me.
Zombie mode. I know an operator fell asleep at his station and made 75 contacts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't aspire for that either. But I want to finish up that one. I'm over here on 40, and I got 3 that have responded to me in a row, and I seem to have better luck if I just the first one that the WSJTX responds to, let it go, get the 73, and just let it go back to calling CQ. When I've gone in and double clicked on the right pane, the second one that called me. Good Lord. A lot of times you get that first guy that keeps coming back and he will not 73.
Yep.
He won't get, and that is the most annoying. That's kind of where I was going.
Yep. No, I have been there. The WSJTX interface for handling pileups in the normal mode is not great. So to give the succinct answer to your question, how do I handle a pileup? The answer is badly. But that's a great question. All right. Anybody else have any questions?
Where do you go?
Got some. You better have.
Where do you go to synchronize the timing on it?
So
I've got it pulled up now. I'm FT8ing. Can I do that while I'm on the rig?
So WSJTX uses your system time. So you have to use a utility to set your system time. And there it is, dimension 4. This is the utility I use on my laptop. It works perfectly as long as you have internet. It uses the network time protocol to set your system time. If you don't have internet, I've been experimenting with one of the cheap $10 Amazon GPS chips. There's software available for those as well. And there's a POTA contact right there. Whiskey 6 Zulu Delta is out at a park right now. So I can't resist trying to pick him up. But yes, I recommend Dimension 4 highly. Any other questions? Sounded like you had something, John?
No, I didn't. I was saying, I know there's got to be more questions out there because there's a lot of information in what you just gave us.
Craig, this is Walt Palmer. Can you hear
Nice
me
to hear
okay?
from. I can hear you great, Walt.
Okay. Yeah, just one note. If anybody's running Windows 10, you can go into your settings and go to your, I think it's time and language or something to that effect, and set your clock like that without having the DIM4 loaded up.
So the answer to that is yes, you can. Occasionally, especially this is more true for older versions of Windows, but occasionally in Windows 10, this doesn't actually set your clock right. The target for this is to get your clock set within 2 seconds, is what Microsoft says. Whereas Dimension 4 is much closer than that. They're wanting to get it within a millisecond or so. But that is true. It is a matter of the way that the Windows time protocol interfaces with your BIOS on your motherboard.
Okay.
But yes, that is a good point. This is probably good enough as long as you have it synced. Now, the other thing about this, if you have my Dell laptop that I use for this, the clock built into the motherboard is terrible, and it drifts by about a second every other hour or so. And this only runs by default like once every 12 hours, whereas Dimension 4 runs every hour. It can be set to run any time frame you want. But yes, that is a great point. Thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, when I had my previous computer, 76 Pro, 746 Pro, I used a sound card, external sound card with it, and I used that Dimension 4. Well, I had to then with that. But when I got my other computer and then it went to Windows 10, I just started setting the time out of Windows 10 there, and I've made quite a few contacts just using their time machine there.
Oh
But
yeah,
anyway,
so it
just-
can work great, but not in all cases, and unfortunately not in my case,
Mhm.
because the motherboard in this laptop's old and must have a bad crystal in it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go for it.
W3PAL. Can you use this software without internet connection?
Yes. As long as you have accurate time, the only thing you need is your radio. And then there is software. I forget the name of it, but there is software available that actually uses other people's FT8 signals to calibrate your clock. One of the fields you get in FT8 is this DT, this the delta time, and it shows you how far you're off. If you're seeing 0.1, 0.2, 0.5, you're fine. If this says 1 or 2 or more, then probably no one's going to be able to decode you.
Hey, one more question, if you don't mind. Slightly off topic, but you mentioned multiple software packages for applications. Say you had a emergency condition where you have to establish communications between point A and B. We'll keep talking about propagation. Let's assume it's good between us. Besides the voice and or CW, like what digital package what would you use to establish communications? Say I want to send some text or numbers, whatever.
If I could prearrange it, I would probably try to use GS8 call or WinLink. I haven't updated JS8 call with my new call sign yet, so I won't transmit, but this is a great piece of software. It has an inbox here, and it has the same kind of rig control that WSJTX uses, and it has a pretty high throughput rate, and it can be used asynchronously. So you could just have your radio send out a heartbeat using this software, and then whoever you're trying to keep contact with can listen for your heartbeat, and then when they hear it, they can transmit your message to you. So this could be configured to have a message in your outbox. When it hears the other station, you can then transmit. It's not something I've played with that much, and I don't have it set up for that. You have to go in and change some of the configurations. But it's a very powerful tool in theory.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think it would be fun to, as a club, have a JS8 call night sometime so that we can get some practice using this piece of software. I'll say kind of the big difference between the two is FT8 is good for making kind of anonymous QSOs with, people who are just out there. JS8 call is really designed as a communications tool. You can find people on it randomly. Of course, anything that gets transmitted is public, but it is really designed for, hey, I want to talk to Andre, and at least once a day, I know that there's going to be propagation between us, so we can exchange, a few messages every day.
Hey, Craig, it's John. I think there's a real value to JS8 in MCOM for, low bandwidth messaging. For the, WinLink's pretty good, but JS8 call would have some real applications in MCOM, at least on the HF bands.
Yeah. So and this is going pretty far off topic. The difference between GS8 call and WinLink, other than the modes and the details of how it works, is WinLink usually requires some infrastructure. So usually you have, an intermediate party who's handling email for you and moving it out onto the web. Whereas GS8 call, the only infrastructure it requires is your shack and whoever you're trying to talk to, their shack. There's no intermediaries that are required. It can be set up for that. So it can be set up to, like if you're running a net, to kind of repeat everybody's messages so that everybody can hear each other, because you can have many, many people transmitting at once, same as FT8. But yeah, it's a nice tool. I wish I had, well, it's on the plan. I want to play with this more. It seems great. And then and then the other software package we discussed was FL Digi, which I don't have set up on this laptop right now. But it's very popular and has been for a long time, and it has all the modes built into it, including lots of very obscure modes.
Hellschreiber.
Yes.
That's one of Darcy's favorites. Could be because he's German descent, but who knows?
That sounds reasonable.
Or maybe let's set it up on the club's computer and play with it sometimes. Maybe one of the Wednesdays, if you don't mind, Greg.
Yeah, we could do that, or I can bring my laptop as well.
It's a good tool to have.
I'd certainly think so. FT8 you can't really use for serious work. It has, no MCOM utility at all, in my opinion. GS8 call potentially has a lot.
Any other questions for Craig? Well, it looks like we fished a pond dry there, Craig. Great presentation, my friend. Dynamite stuff. Gave a lot of information, a lot of good, solid background for this stuff, and I think a lot of people can get their feet wet now. And I am sure Craig will be around the clubhouse, so if you have questions that you think of as you're delving into this topic, feel free to reach out to him or see him at the clubhouse on Wednesday nights. He's a pretty good regular there. And as always, we're all here to help each other. So if I don't know the answer, one of the officers don't know the answer, we could probably put you in touch with somebody. Skip, you got your hand up. What's up? You have to unmute yourself, Skip.
Yep, that's what I was trying to wiggle a mouse around to. Yeah, I see Vicky has her hand up too. Craig, you want to just give me a call after this is over with, or can we stay on meeting and fiddle with?
Yeah, we can. So we can certainly just stick around on Teams. I'll be around, I don't know, for about another 15, 20 minutes.
Okay.
Miss Vicky, do you have something?
Yeah, I didn't want to get into it now, but I do want to do the Fox and Hound because there was an expedition and I went to the settings and I just got apprehensive about changing anything. So I'll get with you on that as well. Or if you got a cheat sheet that you can shoot to me, we've got each other's contact info.
Yep. So I'll say briefly on Fox and Hound. When you switch to Hound mode, it's not going to break anything. This changes a bit. Basically the main difference is the sequence of messages. You are only exchanging the grid square and reception reports. It disallows you sending 73, and it disallows freeform text. So as a hound, it doesn't really change much. Fox mode adds a list of callers that have called you as well.
No, I played with it a little bit putting up for hound, and I just didn't really get anywhere with it. Or there was some questions or whatever that was on there. So let me do some research on it and I'll get back with you. No worries. Thank you.
Yep. Just note you're not going to break your settings by switching back and forth between normal mode
in the hound mode. Yeah, I saw that, but I just wasn't achieving. Anyway, let me do some research and I'll reach out to you if I have issues. Thank you, Craig.
Right. Sounds good.
All right, folks. Is there anybody else? Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and shut this thing down. If you want to stay online, Craig may be able to answer some additional questions for you. But I'm going to stop the recording now, and we will say 73. Thank you all. Look for you all for field day. Don't.